Hey man, there's a specific kind of confusion a man experiences when a woman likes him but refuses to make it obvious. It's not rejection, and it's not interest either. It's something in between. The signals are there, but they're inconsistent. The energy feels warm one moment and distant the next. And if you don't understand what's happening beneath the surface, you'll either overinvest or walk away too early, thinking nothing was ever there. When a woman is genuinely interested but doesn't want to reveal her position, her behavior becomes indirect by default. She doesn't pursue openly, she creates conditions, situations where you're invited to step forward but never pushed. She wants to see how you move without giving you certainty, not because she's playing games maliciously, but because certainty removes leverage, and leverage feels like safety to her emotional world. This is why her attention often comes in waves. She engages deeply, then pulls back. She asks personal questions, then becomes suddenly reserved. That pullback isn't disinterest, it's regulation. She's checking whether she's revealed too much, whether she's losing control of the emotional balance, and the moment she feels exposed, she retreats just enough to restore internal equilibrium. You'll notice that when she likes you but hides it, she watches more than she speaks. She observes how you react when she doesn't respond immediately. She notices whether you chase clarity or remain composed. Your response to uncertainty tells her more about your emotional stability than any conversation ever could, and she's quietly scoring that in her mind. Her compliments, if they come at all, won't be direct. They'll be framed as observations, jokes, or offhand remarks. She might compliment something you did, rather than who you are. That's intentional. Praising actions feels safer than praising character, because it doesn't fully expose desire. It allows her to test connection without placing emotional chips on the table. You may also notice subtle competition cues. She references other men, not to make you jealous overtly, but to gauge your reaction. Does your energy shift? Do you become quieter, more eager, detached? These reactions tell her whether she holds emotional influence over you. And influence, to her, is reassurance that attraction exists on both sides, without her having to say it out loud. When she likes you but stays guarded, she rarely initiates in obvious ways, but she always responds, quickly, thoughtfully, with continuity. She keeps conversations alive without appearing needy, and if you stop engaging, she'll often find subtle ways to reopen the door without making it look like pursuit. A question, a callback, a reason to reconnect that doesn't expose intent. What confuses most men is that this behavior feels contradictory, warmth paired with distance, interest paired with restraint, but there's no contradiction in her mind. She's trying to stay emotionally safe while remaining connected, and safety to her means never being the first one to fully reveal attachment. This is where men often make mistakes. They either push for clarity, forcing her to define something she's not ready to define, or they withdraw entirely, assuming the interest wasn't real. Both responses collapse the dynamic. The first triggers her defenses, the second removes the tension she was using to assess you. The man who understands this doesn't chase signals or demand confirmation. He stays consistent, calm, present. He doesn't reward pullbacks with insecurity, and he doesn't punish them with coldness. He allows space without disappearing, and in doing so, he creates the one condition she can't ignore: emotional safety without pressure. That's when guarded interest either deepens or reveals itself fully. When a woman likes you but refuses to show her hand, silence becomes one of her favorite tools. Not silence as punishment, but silence as a mirror. She wants to see what rises in you when there's no reassurance. Do you panic? Do you over-explain? Do you suddenly perform? Or do you remain steady, unchanged, and self-directed? Your reaction to silence quietly answers questions she hasn't even verbalized yet. This is why emotional composure matters more than charisma in these moments. Attraction at this stage isn't built through clever lines or constant presence. It's built through non-reactivity. The man who doesn't rush to fill every gap communicates something powerful without saying a word, that his inner world isn't dependent on her validation. And paradoxically, that independence is what makes her curiosity deepen. You'll also notice that she may create mild emotional friction, nothing dramatic, just enough uncertainty to test your grounding, a delayed response, a sudden shift in tone, a moment of unpredictability. These aren't traps, they're diagnostics. She's measuring whether your sense of self is stable or easily shaken by external feedback. When she's hiding interest, she often becomes more playful than romantic. Humor gives her plausible deniability. If she jokes, teases, or keeps things light, she can retreat emotionally without embarrassment. If the dynamic shifts, playfulness allows closeness without commitment. It's connection with an exit door, and that exit door matters deeply to her sense of emotional safety. Another sign is selective vulnerability. She won't open up fully, but she'll reveal just enough to invite reciprocity. A story with emotional weight, followed by a quick change of subject, a personal admission framed casually. She's testing whether you can hold emotional information without trying to fix it or capitalize on it. This is where many men unintentionally disqualify themselves by moving too fast once vulnerability appears. They interpret it as a green light rather than a trust probe. The man who listens without escalating, who acknowledges without attaching, sends a powerful signal: emotional intelligence without emotional hunger. You may also notice that she remembers details about you that you don't recall sharing deeply. Small preferences, offhand comments, subtle patterns. When interest is present but concealed, attention sharpens. She's building a quiet internal model of who you are without letting you know she's studying you at all. Importantly, when she likes you but hides it, she rarely pressures you. Pressure would reveal desire. Instead, she creates availability without demand. She's there but not chasing, interested but not invested publicly. And this balance allows her to remain emotionally protected while still staying connected. The dynamic only collapses when a man tries to force certainty prematurely. Labels, confrontations, or emotional ultimatums at this stage don't clarify attraction, they shut it down. Because what she's evaluating isn't your desire, it's your emotional stability in the presence of ambiguity. The man who handles this phase well doesn't rush outcomes. He lets interest breathe. He doesn't interpret restraint as rejection or curiosity as commitment. He remains present without performing, attentive without hovering. And when that happens, she reaches a crossroads. Either she steps forward willingly, or she fades away naturally. And in both cases, the man remains centered, unaffected, and intact. There comes a point where her restraint begins to cost her more energy than it saves. She's been monitoring, regulating, staying measured for too long. And when interest is real, that internal tension builds. You'll feel it in the way she lingers slightly longer in conversation, or how she circles back after a pause that didn't need to exist. These aren't accidents, they're pressure leaks. This is when she becomes unusually attentive to your boundaries, not just whether you have them, but whether you enforce them calmly. She notices if you say no without guilt, if you don't over-justify decisions, if you maintain direction even when connection is present. Boundaries at this stage aren't obstacles to attraction, they're anchors that make attraction feel safe. You might also notice a shift in her tone when you're unavailable. Not dramatic, not confrontational, but subtly different. More curiosity, slightly more warmth when you return. She's recalibrating how much space she has access to without directly asking for it. And how you handle absence matters more than how you perform presence. When she likes you but hides it, she often tries to understand your emotional independence indirectly. She may ask about your routines, your goals, your past, not to bond immediately, but to see whether your life has structure beyond connection. A man with direction creates emotional gravity without effort, and gravity pulls quietly. This is also when her questions become layered. On the surface, they sound casual. Underneath, they're diagnostic. She's not asking what you think, she's asking how you think. Your answers reveal whether you're reactive or reflective, defensive or grounded, and she listens more closely than she lets on. One of the clearest signs the mask is slipping is when she starts seeking your perspective without framing it as flirtation. She wants your take, your opinion, your interpretation of things unrelated to her. That's attraction shifting from emotional curiosity to respect, and respect is far harder to fake than interest. At this stage, if you remain steady, she begins to mirror your emotional pacing, not perfectly, but noticeably. If you're calm, she slows. If you're grounded, she settles. Emotional mirroring happens unconsciously when safety and attraction align. And it's one of the strongest indicators that interest has moved beyond surface-level curiosity. What's important here is what you don't do. You don't escalate just because you feel momentum. You don't force definition because the energy feels warmer. You allow things to unfold naturally without grabbing at certainty. That restraint tells her you're not trying to extract something, you're allowing something to form. Eventually, guarded interest reaches a tipping point. She either steps forward with clarity or she pulls away completely. And that outcome depends less on what you say and more on how you hold yourself throughout the ambiguity. Stability invites honesty. Pressure invites retreat. The man who understands this phase doesn't fear either outcome. If she reveals interest, it's because she chose to, not because she was cornered. And if she disappears, it's because alignment wasn't there, not because he failed. In both cases, he walks forward unchanged, knowing that attraction built on emotional safety is the only kind worth keeping. At this stage, emotional patience becomes your greatest advantage, not because it manipulates, but because it reveals. Most people rush connection out of discomfort with uncertainty. They want labels, reassurance, direction. But when you're patient without disengaging, you create a rare emotional environment where nothing is demanded and nothing is forced. And in that space, her guarded interest has nowhere to hide. It either matures into clarity or dissolves on its own. What she's responding to now isn't effort, it's containment. Your ability to hold presence without needing resolution tells her you're not emotionally hungry. You're not leaning on the interaction to feel whole. And that communicates something words never could. That connection with you is additive, not necessary for survival. That distinction changes how she experiences attraction entirely. This is why consistency quietly outperforms intensity. Intensity feels exciting, but it's unstable. Consistency feels boring at first, but it builds trust beneath awareness. When your tone, availability, and demeanor don't fluctuate based on her behavior, she starts to feel something unfamiliar, emotional predictability, without control. And for someone who guards her cards, that's disarming in the best way. You'll notice she begins to relax around you in subtle ways. Her responses become less filtered, her pauses feel more natural, she stops monitoring her own reactions as closely. This isn't sudden vulnerability, it's emotional fatigue, giving way to comfort. Guarding interest requires energy, safety conserves it, and she's unconsciously choosing the environment that feels easier to exist in. This is also when emotional testing decreases, the delays shorten, the unpredictability softens, not because she's decided anything consciously, but because she no longer needs to regulate the dynamic so tightly. Your steadiness has answered the questions she was too guarded to ask directly, and once those questions are answered, the mask starts to feel unnecessary. One of the clearest shifts happens internally, before it ever shows externally. She stops preparing exit narratives. She's no longer half present while scanning for reasons to disengage. Instead, she becomes more here, more attentive to the moment, rather than the outcome. And presence like that only emerges when emotional safety has replaced emotional defense. What's important is that you don't change when this happens. You don't reward closeness with pressure. You don't interpret openness as obligation. You remain the same man you were when uncertainty existed. That continuity reinforces the very thing that allowed her to drop her guard in the first place: emotional reliability. If she eventually expresses interest openly, it won't feel dramatic, it won't be a confession or a sudden shift. It will feel calm, almost obvious in hindsight. Because the truth is, real attraction doesn't need spectacle, it needs space to become safe. And you provided that space without trying to control what grew inside it. And if she doesn't step forward, if she fades instead, you don't interpret that as rejection. You recognize it as misalignment resolving itself. Guarded interest that never becomes clarity isn't something to chase. It's something to acknowledge and release. Because what you're building isn't momentum, it's discernment. The man who understands this doesn't try to decode every signal or extract meaning from every pause. He lives fully regardless of outcome. And paradoxically, that independence is what makes his presence unforgettable. Because he didn't ask her to reveal her cards, he simply gave her the space to decide whether she even wanted to play. There's a quiet moment that arrives when guarded interest can no longer sustain itself. It's not loud, it doesn't announce anything, it's simply the absence of tension. The conversations feel less performative, the pauses feel natural instead of strategic. And you realize something important has shifted, not because she declared it, but because she no longer feels the need to manage the dynamic. This is when many people confuse indifference with strength. They think pulling away harder, becoming colder, or acting detached is what seals attraction. But indifference isn't strength, it's avoidance. What actually creates depth is availability without attachment, being present without clinging, open without chasing. That balance communicates maturity in a way silence never could. When she's no longer hiding her interest, she stops testing extremes. There's no longer a need to provoke reactions or manufacture uncertainty. Instead, she starts showing consistency in her own way. Not dramatic consistency, quiet reliability. And that's often overlooked because it doesn't come with fireworks, but it's far more telling than intensity ever was. What's happening beneath the surface is that her nervous system has relaxed. She's no longer anticipating emotional risk with you. She's no longer bracing for instability. And attraction that exists in a regulated nervous system feels very different from attraction born out of anxiety. It's calmer, slower, more grounded, and much harder to shake. You'll notice that she begins to include you in her internal world, not just her external one. She shares thoughts she hasn't fully processed yet, ideas still forming, feelings without a polished narrative. That kind of sharing isn't about impressing you, it's about trusting you with unfinished pieces of herself. And trust like that doesn't coexist with emotional armor. The key is that you don't change your posture when this happens. You don't lean in harder, you don't become overly available. You simply remain congruent. And that congruence reinforces the safety she's responding to. Because the moment you alter yourself to lock it in, you reintroduce the very instability she was evaluating you for in the first place. If you zoom out, you realize something important. This entire dynamic was never about her hiding interest. It was about her assessing whether closeness would cost her peace. And your role wasn't to persuade, it was to demonstrate through behavior that closeness didn't require emotional sacrifice. This is why the outcome no longer defines you. Whether she steps fully into openness or chooses to step away, your internal state remains unchanged. You weren't waiting to be chosen. You were simply present, aware, and self-directed, and that posture keeps you grounded regardless of what anyone else decides. The irony is that when a woman finally feels safe enough to stop hiding, the man she's drawn to no longer needs that revelation to feel complete. And that's what makes the connection healthy instead of consuming. Two people choosing alignment, not one person seeking validation. In the end, how women act when they like you but hide their cards isn't a puzzle to solve, it's a process to observe. And the man who understands this doesn't rush, react, or retreat. He remains anchored in who he is, and from that place attraction either grows naturally or clears space for something better to arrive. When a woman is interested but refuses to show her cards, her behavior becomes a quiet contradiction. On the surface, she looks distant, casual, almost indifferent, but underneath that calm exterior is constant calculation. She watches what you do more than what you say. She remembers small details you don't realize you revealed. She measures how quickly you reply, how easily you pull back, how stable your mood remains when she introduces uncertainty. This isn't deception for the sake of cruelty. It's self-protection mixed with desire. Showing interest too openly feels like surrender, and surrender feels risky. So instead, attraction is expressed sideways, subtle tests, mixed signals, strategic silence. What most men misunderstand is that interest doesn't always look like warmth. Sometimes it looks like resistance. She might delay replies, not because she doesn't care, but because she cares too much and wants to regain control. She might question you, challenge you, or suddenly pull emotional access away after a good moment. That push-pull isn't confusion, it's calibration. She's trying to see whether your attention is fragile or grounded, whether you panic when access is reduced, whether your confidence depends on her approval. Every reaction you give becomes data. You'll also notice that when she's interested, her actions contradict her words. She may say she's not ready, busy, or just seeing where things go, yet she keeps reappearing. She checks your stories. She circles back after distance. She creates reasons to stay in your orbit without committing herself emotionally. This isn't accidental. It's a way of staying connected while avoiding vulnerability. Words create accountability. Actions don't require explanation. That's why behavior always tells the real story, especially when interest is high but unspoken. Another tell is how she reacts to your absence. When a woman doesn't care, silence feels like relief. When she does care, silence feels loud. She may not chase directly, but she'll probe. A random message, a casual question, a reaction to something insignificant. It's not about the content, it's about checking access, seeing if the door is still open, seeing if you're still emotionally available without her having to expose herself. The moment you respond calmly, without eagerness, without resentment, you change the power dynamic entirely. What keeps this dynamic alive is mystery. When you don't over-explain, don't over-validate, and don't rush to define things, you create space for her emotions to move freely. Attraction thrives in uncertainty, far more than in reassurance. The mistake men make is trying to clear things up too early, forcing clarity before emotional momentum has settled. That pressure collapses tension. It turns curiosity into obligation, and obligation kills desire faster than disinterest ever could. When she truly likes you but won't show it, she studies how you handle yourself when nothing is guaranteed. Do you remain consistent without becoming predictable? Do you stay kind without becoming available on demand? Do you keep your life moving forward, whether she's present or not? This is the silent audition most men never realize they're in, and passing it doesn't require clever lines or emotional intensity. It requires restraint, self-respect, and emotional discipline. In the end, the men who stand out aren't the ones who chase clarity or demand reassurance. They're the ones who let attraction reveal itself naturally over time, who trust patterns over promises, who understand that when interest is real, it doesn't disappear, it just hides until it feels safe to come forward. And when it finally does, it's not because you convinced her, it's because you never pressured her to choose before she was ready. At this stage, what most men still fail to grasp is that attraction is rarely loud once a woman feels emotionally invested. Early interest can be playful and obvious, but deeper interest becomes guarded. The more she feels, the more she manages herself. She doesn't want to give leverage. She doesn't want to reveal vulnerability that could later be used against her intentionally or not. So instead of leaning in, she regulates distance. She keeps things just ambiguous enough to stay safe while still staying connected. This is why the man who stays emotionally stable during this phase quietly separates himself from everyone else. He doesn't force momentum. He doesn't demand proof. He lets the situation breathe, and in doing so, he becomes the safest place her emotions can land. You'll notice that when her interest deepens, her curiosity intensifies in subtle ways. She asks indirect questions about your past, your values, your boundaries, often disguised as casual conversation. She pays attention to how you speak about other people, especially women. She watches how you respond to disrespect, how you handle stress, how you react when things don't go your way. This is not random. She's assessing emotional leadership. She wants to know whether your sense of self is internally anchored or dependent on validation. Men who over-explain themselves fail here. Men who stay calm, concise, and self-assured without arrogance pass without realizing they were being tested at all. One of the most revealing moments is when she creates emotional friction on purpose. A delayed reply, a cancelled plan, a slightly dismissive comment. These moments aren't about cruelty. They're about observation. She wants to see if your behavior changes when comfort is removed. Do you chase? Do you withdraw dramatically? Do you become passive-aggressive? Or do you remain steady, respectful, and unchanged? This is where attraction either strengthens or collapses. Emotional volatility signals insecurity. Emotional steadiness signals strength. And strength, when it's quiet and consistent, feels magnetic rather than intimidating. As interest grows, she may paradoxically reduce availability, not because she's losing attraction, but because she's trying to maintain balance. Emotional attachment feels destabilizing if it moves too fast. By pulling back, she regains a sense of control. Men often misinterpret this as rejection and rush to fix things, but the men who understand the rhythm do the opposite. They allow space without resentment. That space becomes a mirror. It forces her to sit with her own feelings rather than being distracted by constant interaction. And when she returns, it's not because you pulled her back, but because she chose to come forward. There's also a shift in how she communicates. Once attraction becomes real, the conversations may seem lighter, less emotional, even surface level at times. This isn't boredom, it's regulation. Deep conversations create emotional exposure, and exposure creates risk. So she keeps things playful while still staying connected. The man who understands this doesn't push for depth prematurely. He lets emotional intimacy unfold naturally, knowing that when a woman feels safe, depth arrives on its own without being requested. Another sign of hidden interest is how she reacts to your independence. When you prioritize your life without apology, your work, your purpose, your discipline, it creates contrast. She notices that you don't orbit her. You don't rearrange yourself for access. This doesn't push her away. It sharpens her awareness. She begins to feel that your attention is valuable, precisely because it isn't guaranteed. And that scarcity isn't manufactured. It's the natural result of a man who already has direction. Attraction intensifies when interest is earned, not handed out freely. Silence plays a critical role here. Not silence as punishment, not silence as manipulation, but silence as neutrality. When communication pauses and you don't rush to fill the gap, something important happens. Her emotions have room to surface. She becomes aware of the connection rather than being constantly stimulated by it. This is when curiosity turns inward. She starts thinking instead of reacting, and when she reaches out again, it's often with more intent, more presence, more investment, because the silence clarified what the noise was hiding. What truly distinguishes men at this level is their refusal to personalize uncertainty. They don't internalize mixed behavior as a reflection of their worth. They understand that attraction unfolds unevenly, that emotions don't move in straight lines. Instead of demanding reassurance, they observe patterns. Instead of reacting emotionally, they respond thoughtfully. This creates emotional gravity. She senses that you're not trying to extract something from her, that you're simply showing up as you are. That lack of pressure is rare, and rarity creates value. Eventually, when a woman decides to show her cards, it doesn't come as a dramatic confession. It comes as consistency. Effort becomes visible. Communication becomes clearer. Resistance fades without explanation. The tests stop because the answers are already known. And if you've handled the earlier stages with patience and composure, this transition feels natural rather than forced. You didn't negotiate attraction. You allowed it to mature. That's why it lasts longer and feels more grounded when it finally becomes explicit. The final truth is this: attraction doesn't reward intensity, it rewards stability. The men who win aren't the loudest, the most emotional, or the most persistent. They're the ones who remain unchanged by uncertainty, who let interest grow without interference, who understand that when someone likes you but doesn't show it, the most powerful move is not to demand clarity, but to remain clear within yourself. Because when you don't need the answer, you often become the answer she was quietly searching for all along. As things move forward, the dynamic subtly flips. Instead of wondering where you stand, she starts wondering where she stands with you. This is not something she announces, it shows up in increased awareness. She notices changes in your tone. She replays conversations. She becomes more attuned to your availability, not to control it, but to understand it. When a man doesn't chase clarity, clarity begins to chase him. This shift happens because emotional investment grows fastest in uncertainty that feels safe, not uncertainty that feels forced. At this point, her behavior may look contradictory on the surface. One moment she's warm and engaged, the next she's reserved and distant. This isn't confusion, it's internal negotiation. Part of her wants to lean in, another part wants to preserve emotional leverage. The man who understands this doesn't label it or react to it. He stays present without becoming reactive. He doesn't reward distance with desperation or punish it with coldness. He simply remains consistent, and consistency becomes the reference point she measures everything else against. You'll also notice that she begins to mirror you more. Your pace, your language, even your emotional restraint. This mirroring is unconscious. It's her way of aligning without exposing herself. When you're grounded, she becomes grounded around you. When you're calm under pressure, she relaxes into that calm. This is why self-regulation is so powerful. You're not managing her emotions, you're setting an emotional environment where attraction can deepen without chaos. Another subtle sign appears in how she speaks about the future, not directly involving you, but adjacent to you. She mentions plans, goals, or ideas with an openness that invites inclusion without asking for it. This is her way of testing compatibility without committing to expectation. The man who hears this doesn't jump ahead, he doesn't insert himself prematurely. He listens, engages lightly, and lets time do the confirming. Patience here isn't passive, it's strategic composure. What often surprises men is that the less they try to interpret every signal, the clearer the signals become. Over-analysis creates noise. Calm observation creates insight. When you stop trying to decode her every move, you start noticing patterns instead of moments. Patterns tell the truth, and when patterns show growing consistency, you don't need reassurance, you already have evidence. This mindset shift alone changes how you show up, making you more attractive without trying to be. As attraction stabilizes, her tests become less frequent and less intense, not because she's won, but because she feels secure enough to stop checking. Emotional security doesn't come from words, it comes from predictability without boredom. When you remain self-directed, emotionally steady, and respectful of space, you communicate reliability without sacrificing independence. That balance is rare, and rarity amplifies value. There's a moment, quiet, almost invisible, when resistance dissolves. It doesn't come with a declaration, it comes with ease. Conversations flow without tension. plans happen without negotiation, communication feels mutual rather than measured. This is the outcome of not forcing timelines. You didn't rush the process, and because of that, the connection feels organic instead of fragile. What forms here has depth because it wasn't rushed into existence. If it doesn't progress, the lesson remains just as valuable. You walk away without resentment, without self-doubt, without the need for closure. Because you didn't invest from need, you invested from choice. And that means you keep your self-respect intact, regardless of outcome. This is the real win most men overlook. Emotional self-sufficiency that doesn't depend on anyone else's response. The men who master this stage of dating don't see themselves as being evaluated. They see themselves as evaluating as well. They're present but not attached to outcome, interested but not dependent on validation. This internal posture shifts everything. You stop trying to be chosen and start choosing wisely, and paradoxically, that's when you're chosen more often. In the end, when someone likes you but hides it, the solution isn't pursuit, it's presence. Not intensity, but integrity. Not pressure, but patience. Attraction unfolds best when it's allowed to grow at its own pace, guided by steadiness rather than urgency. And when you embody that steadiness consistently, you don't just become attractive, you become unforgettable. What most men never realize is that once you reach this stage, attraction is no longer something you do. It's something that happens around you. Your silence isn't emptiness, it's composure. Your restraint isn't indifference, it's self-respect. She senses that your life is full even without her participation, and that realization quietly reorders the power dynamic, not in a manipulative way, but in a deeply psychological one. People value what stands complete on its own. At this point, she may begin revealing more of herself, not all at once but in fragments, small admissions, emotional slips, stories that carry vulnerability beneath casual delivery. This is her lowering the shield without announcing it, and the way you respond matters more than what you say. You don't interrogate, you don't rush to fix, you simply listen, grounded and unshaken. Safety is created not by reassurance, but by emotional steadiness. You'll notice that she starts paying closer attention to how she shows up around you. She becomes more aware of her tone, her effort, her consistency. This is subtle but powerful. When a woman likes a man and senses that he's not chasing approval, she instinctively adjusts her behavior to stay aligned. This isn't insecurity, it's investment. And investment grows strongest when it's voluntary, not extracted. There's also a shift in how conflict or potential conflict shows up. Instead of dramatic reactions, she pauses. Instead of emotional swings, she seeks clarity internally first. Why? Because she doesn't want to disrupt the emotional equilibrium you bring. Calm becomes contagious, stability becomes desirable, and without saying a word, you set a standard that chaos doesn't feel comfortable around. What's important here is that you don't mistake this shift for control or entitlement. You don't start expecting more just because she's offering more. You let it flow naturally. Expectation kills attraction faster than disinterest ever could. The man who understands this stays relaxed, appreciative, but never demanding. And that emotional non-grasping is what keeps things alive. Sometimes she'll test one last time, not to provoke, but to confirm. A delayed reply, a slight pullback, a subtle boundary push. This isn't regression, it's verification. She's checking whether your composure was situational or structural. And if you respond the same way you always have, calm, centered, unbothered, you pass without even knowing there was a test. By now, attraction has shifted from curiosity to respect. Respect lasts longer. Respect survives silence. Respect doesn't panic at space. When a woman respects a man, she doesn't feel the need to dominate or escape. She feels oriented, and orientation is what creates lasting connection, not intensity. If she leans in fully, it feels natural, not dramatic. If she doesn't, you feel no loss, only clarity, because your identity was never tied to the outcome. This is where most men realize the truth too late. The real reward was never her reaction, it was who you became by not chasing it. Men who operate at this level don't talk about winning relationships, they talk about alignment. They don't seek validation, they offer presence. And presence, when it's grounded and authentic, becomes rare in a world addicted to noise and urgency. So when attraction is hidden, uncertain, or unspoken, remember this: your power lies in how you hold yourself, not in how you pursue. The moment you stop trying to force clarity, clarity begins to reveal itself. And whether she steps forward or fades away, you walk forward unchanged, centered, intact, and fully in control of your direction.